Hey, are you tired of the left and right politics? I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button, ring the little bell, and prepare to free your mind from the traditional red versus blue. So, with an eye toward the hacking of the Colonial Pipeline, the survey question today at smerconish.com asks, should President Biden issue an executive order banning any payment of ransom to computer hackers? I was motivated to make that the question of the day based in part on a piece that ran in today's New York Daily News, which is in my Twitter feed right now, also posted on the website at smerconish.com, co-authored by my next guest. Rob Knake is the Whitney Shepherdson Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. He served from 2011 through 2015 as the Director for Cybersecurity Policy at the National Security Council. I've interviewed him previously in connection with a book that he co-authored with former National Security Advisor Richard Clarke, which was titled The Fifth Domain: How to Protect Our Country, Our Companies, and Ourselves in the Age of Cyber Threats. Rob, thanks so much for coming back to the program. I appreciate it.
Good to be here, Michael.
You literally wrote the book on this subject, and you told us so. Here it is, right? This is exactly what you forewarned against.
Yeah, in some ways. In other ways, we're actually lucky. What happened in this incident was cyber criminals who were just out to make a buck accidentally forced the shutdown of this pipeline. But it shows the kind of risk from Russia, China, Iran, and other countries who have this same kind of capability and could actually do it on purpose and could make it far, far worse if they wanted to.
What do you mean when you say that they accidentally shut down the pipeline? Walk me through in terms that I can understand as a layperson how this all unfolded.
Sure. So a criminal group believed to be operating out of Russia, but not acting on behalf of the Russian state, not directed by Vladimir Putin, deployed ransomware on behalf of another criminal group to Colonial Pipeline's business network. They did this with the goal of locking up their systems and demanding a ransom payment that might have been in the millions of dollars. But their goal was just to make money, right? Just to lock up the company's data so they couldn't operate and get them to pay the ransom so they would unlock the data and allow the company to go on with their business. And this is what they do day in and day out. Well, in this case, because it was critical infrastructure, they locked up the company's data and systems, and the company was forced to take their pipelines out of operation because it had an impact on their ability to move oil from the Southeast United States to the Northeast United States. Now, this criminal group actually went on the dark web and essentially tweeted out, "We didn't mean to do this. We weren't trying to take down this pipeline. It was just an accident. Sorry."
Well, how often, first of all, how prevalent is this type of activity?
So, I mean, we're seeing ransomware really grow over the last decade. And so now we're seeing groups like this that are just as sophisticated as nation state groups that are able to take over whole large enterprises. And we're seeing this day in and day out. Most of it doesn't actually hit the news. We only hear about these incidents when they hit hospitals or local government organizations or universities, or when the criminals do something that forces the company to disclose the fact. But most ransomware incidents you never even hear about. So it's highly prevalent. It is how the criminal underworld is making most of their money today in cyberspace, and their capabilities are growing each and every year.
Some recent high-profile cases: the city governments of Atlanta and New Orleans, the Washington, D.C. police force, they've all been hit.
They've all been hit. A year ago, the Department of Homeland Security notified the public that a natural gas pipeline had been impacted by ransomware. So we've seen this grow from something that really was hitting your mother's computer 5 years ago. It was outdated, it was vulnerable, it wasn't running antivirus, and the criminals were asking for $300 to unlock her photos of her grandkids, to something that today these actors are literally taking down critical infrastructure necessary to the national security and national economic security of the United States.
Rob, you say in the typical case, the public is not made aware of it and a payment gets made, presumably in most cases by an insurance company. Here's my question. In the typical instance, does it even get reported to law enforcement? And if so, at what level? Who is responsible for investigating and prosecuting these crimes?
So it often does not get reported to law enforcement. There's no requirement that private industry make that kind of report. It will get reported to local law enforcement, sometimes to the FBI if it's the financial sector, make it reported to the Department of Homeland Security and the United States Secret Service. But overall, there's no requirement that these reports be made. And most incidents aren't investigated. These adversaries are overseas. They're untouchable by US law enforcement. They're operating under the protection of foreign governments that are hostile to the interest of the United States. And so there's really very little in most cases that law enforcement can do.
In this instance, Dark Side, they say that they avoid hacking hospitals, funeral homes, and nonprofit. They take aim at large corporations, at time donating proceeds to charitable institutions. Many charities have turned down their offers of gifts. Is that a pattern that you see?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is these groups are trying to essentially say, look, we're Robin Hood. We're not doing harm. We're
Right.
taking from these big evil corporations, an oil company that's selling a product that harms the environment. We're going after these kinds of groups. We're not going to go after the hospitals. We're the good guys, and we're going to take our proceeds and we're going to donate them to a good cause. Now, that's just cover for their story in a PR game that's playing out online. But make no mistake about it, these are criminal groups. They're acting against the national interest. And at this point, they risk our national security with their activity.
Rob Kanaki, from 2011 through 2015, was the director of cybersecurity policy at the National Security Council. So today, with Richard Clarke, in this piece that you've co-authored for the New York Daily News, you say, here are a number of things that the Biden administration could be doing to be proactive on the issue. And one of those that I thought was most provocative, you say the president could issue an executive order banning any payment of ransom to computer hackers. Talk to me about that proposal.
Yeah, we think it's absolutely essential. So go back to the development of ransomware over the last few years. Again, it started on your grandmother's computer. Now we're taking down Colonial Pipeline. How did that happen? How did organizations that a few years ago could only target a single computer making a $300 demand have the capacity to take down a multinational corporation's infrastructure, not even their enterprise system, but their infrastructure that they operate? Well, that happened because grandma paid her $300 to the ransomware operator. And they took that and they took all these other $300 payments and they went out and they bought some Lamborghinis and they bought some leather jackets, but they also hired more people and they got better capability. And they got a whole team of experts working to develop their ransomware. And so now they're every bit as sophisticated as the People's Liberation Army hacking units, right? That's because every time a ransom is paid, you're funding the development of the organization's capability. The only way to stop this is to cut off their funding. And we're the ones funding our own adversary here every time a ransom's paid. So we argue in the piece that the president has the authority and should use the authority to block payments to overseas ransomware operators. We think it's absolutely essential. We think it will undermine the criminal marketplace as a whole.
Quote, if no one paid to satisfy the hackers' demands, eventually the ransomware would stop, at least in the US. I underlined the word eventually because it seems to me the next Colonial Pipeline will be taken down deliberately. In other words, somebody's going to get hurt in the process, as those who are holding us hostage would seek to make an example. Somebody's going to have to tough it out in order for this to come about, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're looking at today's incident, right, with the ransomware operator saying we actually didn't want to cause this harm that we're causing.
Right.
So that harm's already happening, right? These groups, although many of them are trying to offer something akin to customer service, they're not always good at what they do. They can do an awful lot of harm. They can lose the encryption keys. They can damage systems, take systems offline inadvertently, as we've seen with Colonial Pipeline. And so to think that we can avoid that harm by paying these ransoms turns out not actually to be true. I think many of these groups, yes, they will swing for the fences, trying to cause harm, trying to force people to make payments against US law. But eventually, I think they're going to go find other things to do with their times. This is an industry we have created.
Has there been heretofore honor among thieves? And by that, I mean, in response to a ransom payment, do they usually turn the machines back on and say, and restore the way that they had said that they would?
So it really varies group to group. Many of the most sophisticated operators will tell you how to access the dark web, and they'll say, look, here's customer reviews of past victims who will testify that we, in
Oh my
fact,
God.
did give them the data back, that we had the keys, that we were responsible, and that we didn't retarget them. And they'll say, you can actually go and contact these people, pick up the phone and dial a friend and find out, yeah, they in fact did turn it on and they showed us the vulnerability. They were great. So yeah, we are seeing that kind of responsiveness. Unfortunately, at a certain point, these groups are going to have victimized everybody they're going to victimize, and they're going to return to old victims. They have to keep on doing what they're doing. It's gotten that pervasive.
Okay, a final and important question. I am sure that there are people listening to this conversation across the country, business people who are looking at the Colonial case and thinking, well, that's huge. It's infrastructure based. They wouldn't possibly come after my business. Who needs to be on guard against what you are describing, either by making sure that their cybersecurity is enhanced or by making sure they've got insurance if they should be hacked?
So I've seen medium-sized businesses that would think that they would escape the view of any cyber criminal sitting in Russia. I've seen those groups taken down repeatedly by different ransomware operators. And many of these groups, they don't stop once you've halted them once. You block their malware once, they're going to come back at you with a new payload that you can't detect until they take you down. And they will do that for as little as a $250,000 ransom. So even if you're a small or medium-sized business, if you operate on the network, which is almost every business today, they're going to come after you.
I'm not looking for you to out any of the people who've been victimized that you're aware of, but what type of businesses are we talking about? I mean, I give me an example if you can, just by industry.
I mean, I've seen absolutely everything, right? Really, a lot of it starts with just understanding who's going to be able to pay, what's a big enough size business, are they vulnerable? Did they click on my first initial spear phishing link? And so, medium-sized manufacturers, small retailers, food and beverage industry, you name it. If you've got something that you put on the internet that you care about, whether it's data or operations, they're going to try and hold it hostage.
I remember when I interviewed both you and Richard Clark when your book came out, The Fifth Domain. And I was surprised when Richard Clark said, I asked him, well, what's the advice you usually give to businesses? And he said, to pay up.
He gives that advice. I didn't at the time. I think I brought him around on it because he's seen the national security consequences of that trend of paying over time. It may make sense for businesses to pay. It doesn't make sense for the United States to allow those businesses to pay.
Rob Kanaki, that was really great. So insightful and a bit frightening as well. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be on.